Hello, welcome to Garden Chronicles. I'm James David. In today's video, I'll be talking about this particular type of flowering fragrant plant known as Gardenia. And this particular one is actually a variegated type where if you notice that this foliage has more of this yellow white kind of molten kind of features on leaves, and one of the factors here is that in most cases these have much more better visual display in comparison to the dark green leafy type of gardenias. I must say one of the beautiful factor about this gardenia, though doubt the name is gardenia, it does have a very strong resemblance and characteristic equivalent to a jasmine flowering plant. One of the factors that I find is the main challenges when it comes to gardenias is that this is a little bit more sensitive and difficult to care for in comparison to jasmine. And in most cases that if in an element where when it comes to the flowers, somehow there seems to be a lot of pest that is being a magnet sort of like attracted to it. And another factor that I find that in most cases if some element that is not accurately which is in a proper sync with this plant, they do tend to have like yellowing of the leaf, bud drop, or even leaf drop. In some cases, the whole plant may die because of shock. Now, one of the things that I can find and I can mention here is that if the plant is healthy, it does reward you with beautiful blooms and also the colorization of the leaves. Now, of course, the plus point when it comes to variegated plants, especially when it comes to gardenia, it does have these colors that actually gives more of better visual display. One of the things that I have to mention in this context is that when it comes to gardenia, these are actually fragrant plants, and I've noticed that the fragrance is more towards the evening time. They may do emit a little bit of the fragrance during the morning, but do watch out in the factor that if you are growing this flowering plant for its fragrance, do take note of it during the evening time. Now, another factor that I find that some gardeners are not aware of it and may not done a proper research and found that because it's a variegated plant and may have purchased it not knowing that it's actually a gardenia, and have also have a factor where they do not enjoy the fragrance, especially when it emits something similar like a jasmine plumera kind of fragrance. And to those who do not enjoy such kind of fragrance note, do take note that to avoid this plant in your garden, because like some instances where I come to know that some gardeners do find that they may end up having headaches because of the fragrance. Another factor here is these blooms do last at least about 1 to 2 days, and once they are spent, they do tend to change color more on the faded yellow kind of colorization, and may not drop off their flowers. Then chances are sometimes these flowers do dry up upon the stem itself, so you may have to deadhead it. And also in this context, in this video here, if you notice that this particular gardenia is actually planted in one section without any contact with any other plants. So if at all that if this is actually planted in an open space garden area where it's exposed to nature and all that, in most cases you might find a lot of insects gathering towards around these flower blooms, and I find in many cases spiders seems to be attracted to it for some strange reason. Maybe it's because of the predator kind of instinct where it actually trying to trap a lot of these pests or insects that comes to visit these blooms. Now, one of the things when I will say is that when I find that when a bloom is full of insects and kind of thing, it's sort of like a detrimental factor of deterrent in a sense that it doesn't really look attractive, especially you want flowers, not insects. So do take note that if you do have insects and such kind of situation in your garden, identifying whether you want to introduce this plant into your garden or in because of this factor, because it, one of the factors about nature is that when there are a lot of insects, it's actually part of nature. So you either have to accept it in the sense that knowing that having this plant can cause this factor. I must say another factor when it comes to lighting is one of the most important issue here when it comes to gardenia is that we've planted in a very shaded area, they do not bloom. And the other factor here, even when it comes to variegation, if they are very much shaded, they may not even give proper colorization on their leaves. Now, one of the things that I've noticed is that there is a issue of balance, that if these are actually grown in a hot blazing direct sunlight, they may have burn marks on the leaves. It may not be same when it comes to the totally green types of gardenia. They may have the ability to adapt, where it may turn a little bit more on a lighter green if it's exposed to very hot direct hot sun. Now a factor here is that they do need a good bright indirect light. In a way to say, when in the factor of indirect light is that if you were to look at a sky and it's very bright but you don't really see the sun glaring at a place, in a way to say that would be a better identification to say indirect light. In that factor here is that when it comes to gardenia, they do need a very good amount of light, at least about 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours of bright indirect light for them to thrive. And a factor here is a lack of which, when it comes to variegation plants, they do turn to more on a greener version. And these are the things when it comes to variegated plants, they are actually unstable when it comes to colors. Here you can see actually a long planter box has been planted here together, three round pots of gardenia which has been transplanted in this situation. In a way you can see the soil is very much more of a clay based soil. When it comes to gardenia, actually any type of soil mix will do, provided that they are not waterlogged soil. That means to say that do avoid a lot of cocoa peat, in a way to say that in most cases when it comes to cocoa peat, they tend to either drain out very fast when you're dried or retain too much water, which can cause root rot. So in a way to say, drainage must be very important. There are cases where they do very well if they are planted directly to the ground, especially more on a hedging kind of a planter, kind of box planter kind of thing. Now I find in the sense that they do very well when they're planted directly on soil. Of course, when it comes to certain cases where if they are planted on in a pot, they must be, at least the pot need to be raised up such that the drainage is faster. In a way to say that there are different contexts of it, in different situations they do behave differently, so you may have to look into it in that kind of context. As long as the plant is actually healthy, then it's good to go. Another thing that I noticed, that gardenias in most cases they don't really grow tall, so it's more like a shrub kind of plant. So they may be very bushy and leggy, something like Exora. So do take note of it, that if they are too bushy, in a way to say very branched out, and they are actually lacking flowers, it will be good time to prune them so that it will be compact, and it will, the plant will actually put a lot of its energy in its blooming cycle. Now, let's say if you come to the worst case scenario where you find a lot of leaves actually falling up, falling down, turning yellow, and let's say when you say a lot is something about 10 to 15 leaves, and all these leaves are like sudden drop, and you find that and more leaves are actually taking place within, say, in a week's time, then I believe that the plant is actually dying, and the best way to save it is to immediately take the whole thing out from the existing potting media, give a very good wash, and let it dry about 30 minutes, and then repot it with a new potting media, which is, in a way to say, it is very well balanced with compost and fast draining medium. It is very important because in most cases, when if it actually happens like that, I would rather say that there is a root rot that taking place and the plant is actually dying. And if this is not actually taken care of immediately, you will find that the whole thing will actually shed off all its leaf, and the branches will turn brown, and it's actually too late to save anything. Another factor is to use a fungicide. Yes, in a way, it may be too late even to use a fungicide when the leaf drop takes place, because by the time the fungicide actually takes its stage to operate to kill the fungus, its damage is already done. So, in a way, to quickly save it is to give a good wash and let it dry for a moment. The idea of drying is just sort of to, in a way, to sterile or whatever that is actually stuck on the roots. Another factor here is it's also good to have a spare plant, even ability where if the plant is doing very well, just have one or two extra pots, just in case that if the mother plant were to die, you actually have a spare. One of the things about gardenia is that it is actually a sensitive plant. Talking about spare plant, I forgot to mention a matter of propagation is just to strip off the bottom of the leaf and just poke it into another potting mix. And in a way, this is quite resilient. In a while, about 3 weeks time, you will actually see new growth appearing from the shoot where you actually planted the branch. One of the things that you have to notice that there are chances of 50-50, where some of it may survive and some may not survive when it comes to propagation. So it'd be good idea to take at least about few cuttings just to have some spares for these gardenias. If you're still with me until now, I would really appreciate if you can click like and if possible do subscribe and support my channel. I have now come to the end of my video. I am trying my best to avoid a lot of unnecessary information like putting the music and stuff like that. And if you really enjoyed it this far, do check out on my other plants, on fragrant plants and jasmine and such, that it might intrigue you for your viewing pleasure and your plant knowledge. Thank you so much for visiting. Have a nice day. Happy gardening. Bye.